Hmm.
There we
There
go.
we go. Rah.
Meh.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. This is Masculine Geek number 64, returning special guest Tim Keefe. And this is another wonderful Wednesday evening. One of the best days of the week, or one of the best shows on the internet. So tonight we're going to be talking about the concept of narrative. And since this is something that Tim has been wanting to do for a while, and he's decided to do so on the Masculine Geek Show, we're going to allow Tim to take it away.
Well, thank you, Vince.
You're welcome.
So here I am again with the esteemed panel. I'm so excited, as you can tell.
Yes.
Tim, I don't think you get emotional ever. I think it's just totally maintaining an even strain with you. Tim, the even strain. That's your name.
That doesn't sound right. It sounds like some kind of weird venereal disease.
Sounds like COVID.
Yeah,
It sounds like the bad sequel to the Andromeda strain.
Yeah.
that's right. It's Jesus.
Even keeled Tim.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay. Well, to the esteemed panel, I thank you. I thank you very much for allowing me to come back on again because this narrative thing is kind of a bee in my bonnet, and I wanted to share it with you, particularly since we have two published authors with us on the esteemed panel. And so, narrative is, of course, a big part of what you guys do and what you have done. So, this is why I thought it would be particularly interesting.
Indeed.
Okay. So, I had 3 books in mind, which I did not ask you guys to read. That was my job. As I've been reading through narrative, because I am a geek, I do these things for fun. I really became intrigued with these books for a few reasons. And the first book is about this, it's titled The Seven Basic Plots in Literature. So I can't remember the guy's name, I don't have it up, but this book has been around for a while. And that's what attracted me, and we can discuss that first. But quickly with the other 2 books. The second author is an English professor, but she is utilizing the theory of mind, which is a psychological concept about how does one have a conception of what a mind is. How do we assume that, in particular with literature, that when an author is creating a character, how do they come up with what's going on in their head, their thoughts, and all that? So that figures into the theory of mind. And the last one is titled Useful Fictions, where the author, another English professor, who takes an evolutionary track to this, coming up with why is it that we human beings spend so much time and why are we so intrigued with narratives? Well, a big part of the reason is because the stories are the way that we explain the world that is not factual, and that is a way to relate and to relieve anxiety about the world. So again, instead of relying on facts, you tell stories to come up with an explanation of why something happens, why people act the way they do. This also ties into the theory of mind a little bit.
Keep the
And
monsters away. Yep.
Yep, keep the monsters away and things like that. So that's what intrigued me about these 3 books, and I wanted to to share my notes, toss them out there, and see what you guys had to think. And also, the notes that I sent along earlier were about how narratives are still important for us today. Narratives you see in the news, narratives you see among YouTube content creators, since this is much more common nowadays than it is in print anymore, and how narratives are particularly important for men and masculinity, or narrative stories, masculinity, like the hero's journey, slaying the dragon, and so on and so forth, and how that still is important for us today. Okay,
Are you going to be bringing up legacy?
Right.
I could.
No.
You'll drive Rob away.
I'll drive Rob away.
You'll
Well,
drive
Rob, I
him
thought we were
away.
going to cover legacy on Salt Lake Sit Down. Probably a good
Well,
thing.
we are going to do that one. Yes.
But it's
We're gonna
more
talk
of a
about
more of a let that burn too kind of legacy.
Just let everything burn.
It pretty much is. I mean,
I think the word conflagration is a good one here.
Wildfire is what I want to hear.
Wildfire. Okay.
Wild fur.
That
Wild
too.
fur. Wild fur.
See? Okay, so let's dive right into it. Let's get to the first book, The Seven Basic Plots. So The published authors, Vince, TJ, what do you think are a couple of the 7 basic plots that you have encountered reading and that you might have tried to do when you were writing?
I don't know, because I don't do that. I just write. To me, it's like I just wanted to write something that I wanted to read, and it was a good story. I don't think I even, I don't even think you can go back, I think, and plug those in. But to be honest, I didn't even think of that.
Okay. Well, in
Yeah.
your reading, what are some of the plots that have stuck out? They're pretty obvious when I go through the list.
I'd say one of them is the hero's journey.
Okay, that's one, but it's not on the list. But that's yeah.
And that's overdone and overblown, and don't get me started on that.
Right. Rob, how about you?
The 7 plots. Well, one of the ones that I guess that kind of comes to mind to me would be something along the lines of boy meets girl, boy gets girl, boy loses girl, something like that.
Okay, that is a plot, but it's not on the list.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get to the list anyway. So the first one is overcoming the monster. Okay. So again, I'm relying on notes. I'm not getting into too much of the details of the books, but he breaks these out in a summary. Pretty nice summary. So for overcoming the monster, you have first the anticipation stage and the call, which is one becomes aware of the monster as if from a great distance. Although in some stories we may give in some striking glimpse of its destructive power at the outset, though initially we may see it as a little more than a vaguely menacing curiosity, we gradually learn of its fearsome reputation and how it is usually casting its threatening shadow over some community, country, kingdom, or mankind. The hero then experiences a, quote, call to confront it. Then we get to the dream stage, where the hero makes preparations for the battle to come, and all may seem to be going reasonably well, but our feelings are being stirred. Next is the frustration stage, where coming face to face with the monster and all of its awesome power. Hero seems very tiny, very much alone against such a supernaturally strong opponent. Next, the nightmare stage, where the final ordeal begins, a nightmare battle, where the odds seem to be on the monster's side. And then the thrilling escape from death and the death of the monster. In the nick of time, the monster is miraculously dealt a fatal blow, the dark power overthrown. The community which had fallen under its shadow is liberated, and the hero emerges in its full stature to enjoy the prize he has won from the monster's grasp, a great treasure, union with the, quote, princess, succession to some kind of king. Okay, so where have we seen this plot before?
Where have we seen it before?
Yes, overcoming the monster.
Why do I feel like I'm in like a 12th grade English lit class?
And put on the spot.
Yeah. Mr. Peterson, what have you got to say? Ah!
Legacy. That's what I got to say.
That's right.
Yes. Okay.
There you go. We have an answer right there from the peanut gallery.
Okay.
He kind of liked it there, so I wouldn't say it was a.
Well, come on. I mean, Lord of the Rings. Do you not see this here?
Yeah, Lord of the Rings and all kinds of movies. Yeah, the monster. Yep. And there's also the internal monster too. We go into that later.
Okay. One film that came to mind, and we were talking last time about 80s movies, was Dragon Slayer.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very much interesting, and it fits into this overcoming the monster because there's the monster. It's the dragon that's threatening the village. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's the first plot. The second one is rags to riches. Okay. So breaking this out, you have initial wretchedness at home and the, quote, call again, introduced to the young hero or heroine in an original lowly and unhappy state, usually at home, possibly overshadowed by malevolent or dark figures. Then, number 2, they go out into the world and they have initial success, marked by new ordeals, rewarded with their first limited success. They have some provision of their eventual glorious destiny. Next is the central crisis. Everything suddenly goes wrong. The shadows cast by the dark figures return. They are separated, the hero or heroine, separated from that which has become more important to them than anything in the world, and overcome with despair. Then independence and the final ordeal. As they emerge from the crisis, we gradually come to see the hero or heroine in a new light. Okay? So, can anybody think of examples where you've seen rags to riches?
Offhand.
I mean,
Dr. Detroit.
Yeah. With one of my favorite actors.
Yes. Fat Pudwack.
Fucking Pudwack.
Fat fucking Pudwack.
Fat fucking Pudwack.
The Count of Monte Cristo is an example.
Yeah, Count of Monte Cristo, Zorro.
Zorro, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Even the Man in the Iron Mask.
Okay, good one.
And then what's the name of that?
Even down to the Three Musketeers in a sense.
Yeah, in a sense.
Dumas. Yeah.
Okay.
Dumbass. Man.
All right, so plot number 3 we have is The Quest. Okay. So we have The Call, yet again. Life in some city of destruction has become oppressive and intolerable. Hero recognizes he can only rectify matters by making a long, difficult journey. Then he makes the journey. Hero and his companion set out across hostile terrain, encountering a series of life-threatening ordeals. Thrilling escape, deadly opposites, so on. Next, the arrival and frustration. Your hero arrives within sight of his goal, but he is far from having reached the end of his story because he sees new and terrible series of obstacles looming up. The final ordeals has to go through a last series of tests, often 3 in number, that prove he is truly worthy of the prize. And then the goal. After a last thrilling escape from death, the kingdom, the quote princess, or the life-transforming treasure are finally won, with an assurance of renewed life stretching indefinitely. Lord of the Rings, bingo.
Excalibur.
That's classic. Yep.
Excalibur. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
The whole thing with Arthur withering away, and his knights had to go out and find the fucking Grail, and then they did, and he came back and killed Mordred. You bet. That's that story right there.
Okay. TJ, you got any examples?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. So it's note he says the quest, not the hero's journey, because a heroine could do the quest too.
I mean, there's the Legend of the Holy Grail, right? And all that.
Okay. So plot number 4, voyage and return. Okay. So breaking it down, there's an anticipation stage and a fall into the other world. They're likely to be in some state which lays them open to a shattering new experience. Consciousness is in some way restricted. They might be just young and naive with only limited experience of the world. Next, the initial fascination or the dream stage. After the first explanation of this disconcerting new world may be exhilarating because it is so puzzling and unfamiliar. Then a frustration stage. Gradually, the mood of the adventure changes to one of frustration, difficulty, and oppression. Then the nightmare stage. The shadow becomes so dominating that it seems to pose a serious threat to the hero or heroine's survival. And then ending, thrilling escape and return. Just when the threat closing in on the hero or heroine becomes too much to bear, they make their escape from the other world back to where they started.
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Just what I'm about to say.
Yep.
Okay.
Empire Strikes Back.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
TJ.
I'm thinking of the Odyssey.
Okay.
That too. Classic.
Yep. All right. So
actually, also Big Trouble in Little China. Not for nothing.
Okay. Can you flesh that out a bit?
You've never seen Big Trouble in Little China?
I have seen Big Trouble in Little China, but can you flesh out how it is a voyage and return?
Well, they go into the underworld to do battle and come back. And they also they may not go specifically to a faraway location, but when they take the drug to enhance their abilities, that's also a going out to face the shadow and then come back. So,
okay,
how you like that?
I'll go with that.
Let's go with that. Let's also go with the Golden Child.
Okay, I'll go with that too.
Yep.
All right, so plot number 5, comedy. So comedy is a little bit different here. And there's many different ways you can express comedy, but he cites three three parts of the essence of comedy, which is number one, we see a little world in which people have passed under a shadow of confusion, uncertainty, and frustration, and are shut off from one another. Number two, the confusion gets worse until the pressure of darkness at its most acute and everyone is in a nightmarish tangle. And number three, finally, with the coming to light of things not previously recognized, perceptions are dramatically changed. Okay, so by comedy here, he's not necessarily referring to stand-up comedy, but more like a happy ending type story. So, for example, the Divine Comedy of Dante.
Never-ending story.
Never-ending story, yep. Okay.
Doctor Strangelove, which is Aaron Clary's favorite movie.
Yes. Yes.
His favorite movie, guys. Just he loves it. He's been watching it since he was 5.
Okay. Yeah. So again, comedy here is a happy ending, more or less. Okay. And plot
We all
number
love
6.
a happy ending.
Yes, we do. Okay, so number 6, since we have comedy, we of course have tragedy. So with tragedy, there's an anticipation stage, just like with the other ones. The hero is in some way incomplete or unfulfilled, and his thoughts are turned towards the future hope of some unusual gratification. Then there is the dream stage. He becomes in some way committed to his course of action. For example, Faust signing his pact with the devil, Humbert causing the death of Lolita's mother, which enables him to enter on his affair. Well, and for a while, things go almost improbably well for the hero. Then we have the frustration stage. Almost imperceptibly, things begin to go wrong, little by little. The hero cannot find a point of rest. He experiences a sense of frustration, and he is compelled to commit further dark acts, which lock his course of action more irrevocably. Then the nightmare stage. Things are now slipping seriously out of the hero's control, a mounting sense of threat and despair. And then the destruction or death wish stage, either by the forces he has aroused against him or by some final act of violence which precipitates his own death, murder, or suicide. The hero is destroyed. So, one example the author cited was Macbeth.
Revenge with Kevin Costner.
Okay. TJ?
I was going to say Macbeth, so now I'm lost. I'm trying to think of another one.
Oh, there's many different kinds of tragedies. I mean,
Revenge of the Sith.
I mean, Hamlet is another tragedy. And I'm trying to use something other than Shakespeare. I was actually just watching There Will Be Blood, and I'm wondering if that's considered a tragedy as well.
Okay. I haven't seen it in a while. Can you briefly explain what the plot is and maybe how it might be a tragedy?
Because it's about a oil man who becomes very wealthy, but it's been out for years, so if you haven't watched it and don't want spoilers, get off the channel. He becomes very wealthy, but he's basically isolates everyone from him. He becomes a loner. He's an alcoholic, and he just kind of reduces himself into this very degraded state at the end, almost like an Ebenezer Scrooge character, but even worse, if that makes sense. So he's an Ebenezer Scrooge without the redemption arc.
Okay, without the redemptive arc, yeah.
Another tragedy would be Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And the last plot, rebirth. So a young hero or heroine falls in love under the shadow of the dark power. For a while, all may seem to go reasonably well. The threat may seem to have receded. Eventually, it approaches again in full force until the hero or heroine is seen imprisoned in the state of a living death. This continues for a long time when it seems that the dark power is completely triumphed, and then finally comes the miraculous redemption, where the imprisoned figure is a heroine by the hero, or is the hero by a young woman or a child. Okay, so rebirth stories.
I mean, Are we like on a timer? You know, dun, dun,
No.
Take your time, TJ.
Take your time, TJ.
Take your time, Corporal.
That's right. We're eagerly waiting for the denouement.
Don't get all technical now.
Rebirth. Like looking at all my different movies up there. I'm like, what? Hey, guys, help me out here.
For some reason, I can't think of anything. I don't know
Well,
why.
Rob, let me kick it over to you because I know you're the Stephen King fan. Do you see any of these plots at work in Stephen King?
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of what one this one would be
It?
for a rebirth. No.
No.
No, for a rebirth. Oh God.
What about some of the other plots, like the tragedy? You know, somebody is destroyed at the end. I'd say that's a good portion of
That's quite a bit of them,
Stephen King ones.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No comedies. There's no happy ending. I mean,
No, not
maybe not
really.
talking about the horror ones.
What? Let me ask you this: what would be under these 7 plots? What would the Dark Tower be? Have you read that entire saga
No,
and
I
how
stopped.
it ends? No, not the
It,
movie, dude. Don't even bother with the
no,
movie.
no, I
The
wasn't
movie's a
even going
joke.
there. I stopped after the drawing of the 3 because I
Oh
couldn't
no.
get into it.
Okay. Because the way it ends, man, it's like, oh my God. And you might call it a tragedy, but it's more like it all starts over again. It's like an endless cycle.
Oh, you know what might be? I mean, Rebirth. Not to. I don't think it's a literal one, but what would the Revenant? I mean, that's more of a revenge story.
Yeah, I don't know
But
where you would put a revenge story in the plots.
but it kind of ends on like he takes revenge, but it kind of ends on like this very tragic note.
Does
Uh,
he more or less destroy himself? Like he becomes
well, it's
he might not.
ambiguous. It's ambiguous. That's what's so creepy. Like I was watching that movie at 12 o'clock at night with the only the TV was on, all the lights were off, and I was just sitting there. It's like, whoa, this felt really weird to have it end like that. There's some movies you don't watch late at night and then go to bed. Right? The Revenant's one of them. Braveheart's another. At least when you're 12.
Okay.
I mean,
Last year?
I mean, the Patriot, because it's really it. Some people interpret it as a revenge film. I don't, but I don't see it as a rebirth film either. It's more of a guy returning back to who he was before.
Okay.
Almost.
Okay, that fits in with some of the plots because you're returning back to where you started before, but you are a better person, we'll say.
Well, what about Batman? What about Batman Begins? I don't see this so much as a hero's journey as it's him a rebirth because he's going from one type of man to Bruce Wayne. Now that's not the same as in the comics because in the comic mythology he spends his entire young adult life preparing to be Batman. That's his whole goal. Whereas in the movie Batman Begins, he's kind of just wandering aimlessly through life, and he's finally given some sort of structure or training for that. But there's that one moment where he's in the bat cave and the bats are all flying around, and even though he has a fear of bats, he's kind of embracing them, and so he's being reborn into this new man.
I'll go with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
We're gonna go that way.
Yeah.
One bat, two bat.
Yeah. Okay, so since I've covered the 7 plots, TJ, back over to you. Now, looking at your novels, do you see any of these plots at work in them?
Well, I'm kind of like Vince. I don't really think of it in those contexts. I think that there's definitely going to be stuff like that in the books. But I'm just trying to think of like the one I just wrote. I guess Vince, the one that you just read of mine, the fantasy one. What would you would that be like a quest or a I don't really know how you would put it, characterize it.
There's flavors of a bit of a rebirth and quest in yours, and not just of the main character. So I don't think you could. The categories aren't going to be concrete.
It's a very unusual.
I can. Yeah, I can see bits and pieces of those plot narratives in there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and what the author was getting at in the 7 basic plots is he definitely focused on classic literature, we'll say, up
Okay.
into the 19th century. So you're going to pick up You know, like I mentioned, the Divine Comedy. This has the happy resolution at the end. You have Macbeth, which is held up as a classic of a tragedy where it's the fatal flaw and the protagonist destroys himself. Okay, or is destroyed. Okay, so with quote modern or latter day novels, you're going to have maybe bits and pieces of this and a little bit of a mix. I would also probably wager that when the both of you wrote your stuff, you weren't consciously thinking about what the plots were. They just kind of organically emerged, and you had bits and pieces of them. Is that fair?
Probably, because I think what you're getting at too, and what these plot narratives hold are things that are they transcend, culture, and they're these themes that are just in the human condition, as it were. So I think it comes out in our writing. We can't help but do it.
Yeah,
trying to force, like sitting down. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to write a quest. I mean, that may be in general, like, oh, they're going to go destroy something. But as far as a plot, these psychological plot narratives, TJ and I, and I'm probably, and Rob too, if he used to sit down and think about it, we don't frame it around that. But when you go back to look at it, you say, oh, well, yeah, okay, because of these narratives are probably in our blood, as it were. Just the going back to storytelling from caveman days and being around the fire and keeping back the monsters. So we can't but help write them.
Right. It's kind of like the one epic poem that I wrote that I'm going to have published I'm going to release at the end of the month. That's more of a, not the hero's journey, but it's about a hero, the Beowulf. Where would Beowulf fit in with all these? I can't remember somebody mentioning him.
Good question, because it's been a long time since I last read Beowulf. I'd probably mixes of a quest. I mean, he's gone after fight.
Yeah, the quest. So my next book that's going to be released at the end of the month, we will be making an official announcement next week about it, because I'll be talking about it in detail. But it's a quest, and because it seems like the quest is really not so much the hero going through morally complex or complicated situations, but more of just enduring challenges that test his resolve. Like, he's not forced to make morally complex choices. I mean, like the classic fairy tales, the heroes are never really like, oh, I wonder who the bad guy is. It's like, no, I know who the bad guy is. It's like, it's not a question of who should be killed. It's how do I kill him, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So let's switch gears a minute. Let's look at news narratives. Do we see any of these plots that work in news narratives?
I wouldn't say as much in news narrative. And I say this as a reporter. I would say that these types of narratives are very helpful when writing feature stories and human interest stories. So about people, where it's not so much about the news, it's about telling a story about someone or something. And so but with news sometimes, but news tends to be more straightforward, or at least with me, I try to keep it just the facts. But even with news stories, you have to have some sort of a narrative. It's just a little bit different. You can be a little bit more literary on that when you're doing something that's like you're interviewing someone. Like if I'm talking to a World War II vet, as I've done in the past, I mean, those narratives are more of a quest, right? They want to get back home alive. So that's how the story's framed. Or someone was wanting to start a new business, or they wanted to do something, that kind of thing.
So you'd see a quest more often in a feature story.
Quest, very, very rarely did I ever do a tragedy, because that's just, one of my editors.
Rags to riches, probably a lot of those too.
I had an editor who used to call them women's weepers.
Call them what?
He called them women's weepers, like stories that were meant to make women cry.
Okay. Fair enough.
This was, again, that tells you a lot about. I had an old school editor who would say things like that and get away with it.
Well, how about overcoming the monster? That's what I was trying to think of when I was when you mentioned Beowulf. Because he is overcoming the monster. It's Grendel the monster. But for a feature story, do they ever have anything like that? Overcoming the monster. Fighting against
Yeah,
some huge force. The corporation type thing, that battle and all that.
absolutely.
Have you ever written one of those, TJ?
Oh, which kind? Sorry.
Overcoming the monster.
Yeah, well, that's what the new book. It's called The Song of Wolfgar.
No. In real life, like battling a
Feature
larger
stories.
force. Like, yeah.
That's difficult because the bad guy usually has to be it ends up being a person. And so then you have to, this is the thing about journalism for the most part. You can't tell a story where there's one person who's the bad guy because you got to also tell their perspective if you want to be considered objective. And so that this I think you and I, Tim, or someone else had a discussion about how, and maybe it was Nick August, my interview with him. When you tell whose perspective you provide in a story is in a way tells the reader who they're supposed to have either sympathy for or who they're supposed to understand as a character. So if you have for example, in Tolkien's books, we really don't know anything about Sauron, right? We don't ever see his perspective. We don't see how he's thinking because he's a one-dimensional character as far as from what I've read. Whereas you have other books where the villain is almost the main character in the book. So I think that with news stories, it's a very difficult angle because the bad guy gets to have their say for the most part. So they're not they get to explain themselves. Whereas in a good guy, bad guy story, the bad guy's full story isn't always told necessarily. And that's one of the revisionist viewpoints of a lot of classic fairy tales that we see is that, if we only knew the bad guy's perspective, then they wouldn't be the bad guy. Well, in some cases, other cases, we'd still shoot him anyways. But let him burn.
Okay. All right. Let me ask about D&D. So I've never played D&D in my life. I've known people who do.
You need to get on that.
And so when you guys are doing your D&D, and have you done it over the years? What about, do you guys consciously make up plots as you go along? Because my understanding is that it's kind of a make it up as you go along type of thing in D&D.
Well, yes and no. Back in the day, there were things called modules, and they were pre-made adventures. There was a beginning and an end, and it was up to the DM to follow that beginning to end or modify it as he wishes. I like to modify little bits and pieces, but for the most part, I would stick to the main narrative of that module. Now, and very much like Drew, I don't do any. It's all up here. I don't. And the problem I have with that is if I don't take notes, I have to think about like going back and like who is that? Where is this plot going? This little machination. Mm-hmm. So what I'll do is make it up as I go, and that is a big portion of tabletop role playing. Absolutely.
Okay.
So you're going to see flavors. You'll see flavors of everything we've talked about in Dungeons and Dragons, what makes it that much more interesting.
Okay. And so I'm curious, you mentioned about back in the day with the modules. What kind of plots did you usually see?
For the most part, you're rescuing someone, you're saving something, you're retrieving something. Someone, I forget how Drew phrased it. Something to the fact this person needs this and has to overcome that to get it somehow. So there is a lot of it is a quest. Which with tragedy and a lot of comedy thrown in. So,
okay,
but yeah,
overcoming monsters, of course.
Absolutely, yeah, and they could be, like it could be the Thieves Guild. It could be a group of orcs. Yeah, the Demigorgon. Exactly. Yeah, there could be the big boss at the end, and the big boss at the end could be a human. It could be someone who's, pretending to be your friend, and at the end you're like, oh, holy shit, we just got backstabbed. So,
yeah. Okay, well, those are the 7 basic plots, and let me go ahead and shift into the next topic, which, picking up what TJ had to say about Sauron is a nice segue. So, yes, you are right, TJ. When you read Lord of the Rings, you don't know anything about Sauron, his state of mind. He's just this. He's just this monster, this force that is out there. That you have the backstory, the setup of how he got into power, and now that's what everybody is trying to fight against to take him down. Well, not knowing about Sauron's state of mind, this figures into the theory of mind, that psychological concept. So I'm not going to go too much in the details. I tried to take succinct notes. So what is a mind except a collection of mental events? Okay. Desires, beliefs, thoughts, whatever it is. And that the theory is that some other person or a character in the case of a story has a mind. Okay. And so what the author Linda Sunshine, that's Sunshine with a Z, was interested in here was, how do authors come up with mental states for their characters? What is their theory of mind there? So, and there's many ways that you can do that. It could be explicit, like I remember Shakespeare with asides or soliloquies. It's very explicit what's going on in the character's mind. It could be implicit. You don't quite know. You might have the narrative starting off saying about a person's behavior, and that's a clue to what their state of mind is, or even if they have a mind. Science fiction theory of mind. Does a robot have a mind? And stuff like that. So that's really the gist of that. I'm curious for you, TJ and Vince, in creating your characters about theories of mind, and were you really interested to really put a lot of the thoughts into the characters, making it overt or making it implicit, or not even bothering with that? And maybe it just comes about organically. See what I'm getting at?
What the fuck? Sorry about that.
Or does even the character reflect your own state of mind? Because TJ and I talked about this on one of his episodes, is fiction to some extent autobiographical?
Absolutely.
But I also get really frustrated when I write stuff and then people just presume that I'm writing either about myself or about something in my life. It's like, I don't know what to say. I remember, I think I told you this, Tim. I wrote stories for a writing class, and people started talking as if this was my family in one of these stories. I was like, what? When did I didn't, they just presumed because that's what a lot of people do. It's kind of I understand that writers sometimes want to inject personal stuff into their stories because it helps add to the realism, because it's something that they've directly experienced. But there's a lot, I think that's part of, I'm thinking of the guy who wrote Tarzan of the Apes. I have his book. He never went to Africa, but he was able to describe Africa in a way based purely off of his imagination. And the same thing with, he obviously never went to Mars, but he wrote an entire, he was able to use his imagination on that kind of stuff. And so people can do that, but unless the author stated that something's autobiographical, I get a little wary about including stuff in my books, because then people will read it and just presume that that's me talking about my own life, which a lot of it has absolutely nothing to do with.
Fair enough.
How about you, Vince? Would you say that your writings, your fiction has been autobiographical to a certain extent?
Some of it, which I haven't published yet, are depends directly related with my life, and you guys know what I'm talking about. No, but as far as Tesla and the Lone Lightling's Call, first one, and the second one, which TJ's read, Tesla is already a figure, so I have to take that and say, well, what would he do in this situation, given what we know of him? Now, Dennis Malone, there's bits and pieces of my own psyche. I see that in that character. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm fine with that. People have an unending and unceasing desire to be right. Okay. We all do this. If you watch the show, we do it amongst ourselves. We're people in the chat. We like to be right. So when people read something about something you've written and they know you, they want to draw conclusions and connect dots because it makes them feel good, whether that they want to connect to you on a positive level or a negative level.
Vince, you've read that one book I wrote or you've read at least parts of it, the one from the 30s about the secret paramilitary paramilitary.
I'm delving more into that now that I finished your adventure novella. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a totally different book, right?
Correct. I get what Tim is saying too, and what other people like. They because they know you, and then the way that you write the characters, like, oh wow, that kind of, yeah, I could see TJ maybe did that, or I could see this character being sort of TJ himself, aspects of it, and I agree to some extent. I agree with that. I mean, obviously, you didn't grow up in the '30s, so you can't, but you're like you said, you're using your
Detective Malone, or not Detective Moore from Men Who Walk Alone is clearly not me. Like that's, I think we could all.
Oh yeah. Well, no, he's definitely not. No.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I've had a few responses from people who are like, so what part of your life did this happen? I was like, none. I just made it up. It's called fiction, right? This wasn't this isn't an autobiographical novel or whatever they want to call it.
Yeah. Well, no, not strictly. Like I said, they're just bits and pieces of you in.
I mean, and I wrote some of those books when I was in my early 20s. Like I can imagine, I just was able to imagine what it was like to be the one guy in an environment where everyone else is a dirty, rotten scoundrel, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And you're the only like half decent guy. Like, how do you operate in that environment? Well, I was just logical about it, but I don't know. I'm not saying that guys shouldn't do that, right? If you want to include stuff from your own life, that's cool. I think that helps add to the realism. But
absolutely,
I hope that people who read books they're not trying to like psychologically, they're not trying to psychoanalyze the writer. They just read the book.
Some people do. You just pointed out that people, like, they're people you talk to about your.
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah, and it's like
trying to armchair psychoanalyze TJ.
Yeah, it's like, if I want you to do that, I'll pay you, and I'm not going to pay you. So
just buy my book and read it, you fuck.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not paying you. You pay me. Give me money. See, buy my book.
One for you, one for me.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. I don't know if that answered the question, Tim. I'm not sure.
No, I was intending this to be a free-form discussion, but I wanted to get back to theory of mind for a minute.
Sure.
In creating the characters. So, I confess that I haven't read a lot of fiction, and I do know what Sunshine is getting at, and she gets into a pretty heady discussion, which I'm going to avoid here. But I'm just curious about creating characters and what their minds are like. That you have unfettered access to their mind and what goes on in their mind, or at the opposite extreme, you're running into a one-dimensional character, which we've all encountered in pretty shitty literature, and stories are out there where people really, they don't have the talent or they don't have enough experience to create compelling characters. So that's all I'm going to say, throwing it out there, because you guys have created characters, and I'm just curious to know what you've done about, okay, so, in your case, Vince, Dennis Malone, what goes on in his mind? What is his mind like? And how did you create that?
You want to know? I mean, is that like giving away my secrets here? Well, physically, he's based off an old coworker of mine and a few other people in Hollywood that I just like. Oh, this character would fits perfectly with what I have as far as like Civil War ex-cavalry sergeant. But that's a good question, because it's not one of these things that you sit down and you think about. Now it's trying to go back and fill in pieces.
I'd like to throw my 2 cents in if I can.
Please,
sure.
Rob.
So when you're talking about state of mind, especially, I guess, as it pertains to maybe rather any character, but say the villain. Okay. When I guess while I may not be, a published author like the esteemed panel here, I can think of unpublished things that I've written in the past, and more, I can think of songs that I wrote back in like high school and college when I had a band, and the lyrics, what was going on, with each song that I wrote. And one of the songs that I can think of in particular, it was called "The Other Side of Sanity" was the name of the song. And it was about a guy who basically had been victimized, if you will, bullied, whatever. And he took revenge upon his tormentors. And, he killed them and all that kind of stuff. And the way I looked at it is,
So it was a comedy, right?
well, yeah, totally a comedy. Definitely, like Metallica's a comedy. Okay. But that was my take of, if I had unfettered access with no chance for either getting caught or being punished for an act, what would I do? And that was the basis of that song. That it was, here's my mind being this villain, this character in this song, that these things happened to him. And this guy did not care if he was going to get caught. He did not care what the consequences were. All he wanted was revenge and or satisfaction. And so whenever I've written, I guess, a villain piece, I've always interjected a little bit of me into that character. And I come from the I guess the standing point of, what would I do if no one could stop me? What would I do if there were no consequences? What would I do if I would never get caught? And that's how those characters start to develop is, oh, well, I can do this and I'm going to do that and whatever it may be. And why do you do it? Because I can.
That's pretty cool. Do you still have that song?
I do.
Cool.
Yeah, I do. I still have the music for it, the lyrics, the whole 9 yards.
Karaoke.
Let's do it.
Oh, shit.
Okay. So anybody else got more to say on Mind? Just the depth of characters?
That's a good point that Rob brings up. I like that.
My whole thought is, what's my... I'm trying to think of how to say this.
What's your motivation?
With the question of how much do I want the reader to sympathize, relate to, or empathize with a character, right? And as far as revealing parts of the character, I'm moving more towards the Boba Fett scene from Empire Strikes Back, where Darth Vader is just walking past all the bounty hunters and he's talking about how there's this reward for the Millennium Falcon and yada yada. And then he stops and he turns to Boba Fett and says, "And I want them alive, no disintegrations." And Boba Fett just perfectly still just says, "As you wish." And from that short scene, an entire mythology was built around Boba Fett, because all the subtleties and nuances of that scene, people were able to just build on, and it tapped into people's imagination, because there was always this debate about whether Boba Fett was actually a cool villain or not. And people would say, well, in the movie, he doesn't do anything really cool. When I said, and other people will point out, look, the problem is you're looking at only what you see and not what can be extrapolated from what's not actually portrayed in the movie, because movies are only 2 hours long, right? You don't have time to show everyone's backstory and show everything that they've done.
Boba Fett was vague enough that it left you, the viewer, to paint whatever picture you wanted of him.
Yeah, he's a mystery.
Yeah, and it was mysterious.
You filled in the gaps and with your own creative process.
Yep. So you made him cooler than he really would have been if George Lucas had fleshed him out more. Yeah. Or you made him not as cool as George Lucas may have done it had he fleshed him out more. He's open to interpretation.
Yeah, he got to be whatever people wanted him to be. And so that's what I think is kind of cool about like some of the story. What I like about that kind of storytelling is that it allows you to create a story that people can enjoy by filling in the blanks with their own imagination.
Yeah, to some extent, Han Solo was like that too.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there's a couple movies where you can interpret the film differently depending on how you want to feel about it.
Right. I would interject is the difference between Solo and Boba Fett is Solo is a bit of a mystery. Boba Fett is cryptic.
Right.
Because he rarely ever speaks, except that one line, and then you see his ignominious end at the end of Return of the Jedi.
And not
Yeah,
only does he only
bad.
speak very seldomly, but another thing I would add to that cryptic is the fact that he's in that Mandalorian helmet. You never see his face.
Right.
So you don't, until Phantom Menace or Attack of the Clones, when you meet Jango Fett and realize Boba's his clone that grew up, normally without, growth hormones or whatever. That's the only time you know what Boba Fett looks like. You have no idea, with a voice modulator, theoretically, Boba Fett could have been a woman for all you know. And so you have no fucking clue what he looks like. You don't even know if he's human or not. He could be a totally different race where he's got the gloves on and everything that you don't know. Kind of like how Princess Leia did her little rendition of a bounty hunter to get to Han Solo to get him unfrozen.
Right.
Like, okay, initially for that first moment until she reveals herself, you have no idea, is it male, female?
Yep.
That's the same thing with Boba Fett. It's like, you don't know if it's a guy. You don't know if he's human.
Right.
You don't know anything about him other than, as you wish, and put Solo in the cargo bay. And that's about all he ever fucking says, and he's worth a lot to me,
Right.
But otherwise, you never hear from the guy. So it leaves everything up to interpretation.
Right. I think there was an important kind of, to dovetail off that, there was another important scene in Empire Strikes Back, and that's where Admiral Viet walks in to talk to Darth Vader, and he's just getting out of his chamber.
Hyperbaric chamber, and he's got his helmet up.
His helmet is just about to come down, and for like a half a second, you see this
scarred, the scarred, burned back of his head.
Yep.
And so that was important because now audiences had an idea of one, what he looked like, two, why he was wearing the mask. It set it up for in the third film when Luke finally takes off the mask and people get to see what he looks like. They're not shocked, or they haven't built up in their own minds what he looks like.
Well, Vader's human, or humanoid.
They know he's human, but it wasn't like a buildup where they hadn't given any hints. Like psychologically, the audience knew what they were going to see. In a way, they had an idea of what they were going to see in Darth Vader, and so I think that's the thing. If you're going to be ambiguous at first, but you're going to reveal to them later what they really are, you have to give hints, or else you're going to allow them to fill in the blanks in a way that when they find out what you had in mind, they're going to end up disappointed, because that's what I mean. It was the same thing with the prequels. George Lucas allowed way too much time to pass between the Star Wars movies and the prequels, because by the time they came out, everybody else had already mentally created their own backstory of how things happened, of how the story should be told. So by the time,
fan fiction and that.
Right. And by the time the movies came out, one, they didn't even follow the original movies chronology at all, which was stupid. And aesthetically, it didn't feel like Star Wars. I mean, you're shooting it 20 years later. You're using digital instead of film. You've got CG. There's nothing that feels Star Wars-ish about the prequels. And I know he was trying to do stuff differently, but at the same time, it just didn't feel like it was a Star Wars film. I mean, the people aren't wearing 70s haircuts, right? They're not. That was what I actually kind of liked about Rogue One at the very end, where they really did it justice, where you felt like you were watching, at the very end at least, you felt like you were watching the first film almost, the way that they did things. So I think that's an important thing with writing stories, where you're not going to reveal something fully about a character or a villain at first, but you are later. Well, you got to throw in enough hints to where they at least have an idea of what to expect, so they're not completely thrown off. Because then people emotionally react and they get upset, and that bothers them, and then they don't like the book or the movie, even though there's nothing wrong with your character or whatever, but they feel tricked. They feel manipulated.
Okay, well let me run with villains for a minute because a couple thoughts just popped into my head. So in Empire Strikes Back, or in we could say Return of the Jedi 2 by extension, is that you have Vader and Boba Fett. Boba Fett is cryptic, rarely ever says anything. Vader a little bit more overt, more menacing, but still a mystery because you don't see what he looks like until the very end. But you have the lead up knowing that he was human because of Obi-Wan's backstory to Luke. Okay. So that I would say are iconic villains. Cryptic, laconic, don't say much, menacing. But then you switch it because what popped into mind is what Clint Eastwood has done in movies with the westerns, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and all those. You know, the man with no name. He is the
Right.
quote good guy, but is he really the good guy? He's kind of cryptic, kind of laconic, depending on what the movie is. Fast forwarding several years later, you got High Plains Drifter, really cryptic, laconic, takes care of the bad guys who are much more overt. You know, pretty much a standard bad guy. And then I have to wonder what he portrays in the Western movies. Is that an iconic form of masculinity? Okay, because I wanted to bring this up in here too. So I'll toss that out there and see what you guys have to say. So we got villains versus the good guy, but the good guy could be almost like the good guy, like a Boba Fett. And is that masculine, or how does masculinity figure into that? Anti-hero, yeah, exactly. Red Crusader. And has anybody ever thought to create an anti-hero in a story?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The hell-
Examples?
TJ. Why I'm in process of writing that. TJ, you're vibrating again.
Me?
Yeah.
There's no earthquake. I'm not moving.
It's like something's chattering in the background. Hang on.
Yes.
Oh, that was well. It's the laptop.
Yeah, it's
That's
definitely you.
There you go.
Yeah, it's you.
Okay. Anti-heroes? Anybody got any thoughts? TJ, you put any in your stories? I mean, do you have villains in your stories, and how have you crafted your villains?
Crafting my villains. They've kind of ranged. I mean, this was a topic that I think people kind of got thrown off when I was talking about it on social media. I was thinking, do I want a villain that is totally contemptible and detestable, or do I want him to almost have a Vincent Price like appeal to him, where he's a villain, but you kind of like him, even despite how evil, like he's evil, but he's either charming or he just conveys a strength or determination that he has masculine qualities. I mean, you've got all these different kinds of villains. You even see that in Shakespeare. There's different villains. Like Iago is just this sniveling bastard, and no one would care that he got his head chopped off. Gosh, I'm trying to think of another type of like some of my books.
That's TJ. You're gonna have to do something about that because it's not. And while TJ's doing that, Rob, you're up. Lift your right leg.
What?
No, it's still. Hang on, let's. There you go.
It's
listen to that shit. Yeah, it's definitely a TJ. Yeah.
Okay. How's this? Try it again.
That's good.
Boom.
Yep.
Well, baby.
Okay. So TJ, you were saying?
Oh, just one second. I'm gonna adjust my chair. There we go. All right. See, we're gonna fix this. See. It just depends on the story, because if you have a really like a kind of a it depends on the hero. Like if you have the hero and the villain have to be kind of matched, kind of like Batman and the Joker. That's what makes them so great, right? They mesh well together, right? You have chaos and disorder and a very like in a comical way versus this rigid Law and Order, somber, grim, no sense of humor type guy, right? And yet they what works well is that they play off of each other. But that's why, uh, John, what's going on? That's why the Joker works better than other Bond villains. Where I mean, he's got a huge gallery of villains, probably more so like the best gallery of villains. But we all think about Batman and the Joker because there's something about their relationship as hero and villain, and they're both. I think the thing is also Batman is probably one trip away from going to the psychiatric ward himself. So
he was one childhood beating away from a psychopath.
yeah. So I think you can't have you can't mismatch villains and heroes, right? The hero and the villain need to be right for each other. So there's some villains where it's like, yeah, they're just scum and they need to be killed, right? It's not a question of are they the bad guy? It's like, well, how do we kill them, right? It's kind of like with Kelly's Heroes, like the gold's the gold. We just got to get the gold. How do we get it?
It's a good quest.
We got to get the hippie guy with the tanks, right?
Don't stop hitting me with those negative waves.
Yeah, exactly, man. Dun, 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 dun.
Okay, Rob, over to you. I wanted to bring Stephen King back into this. So you know that the majority of his novels are some supernatural evil, rather Lovecraftian, that they're battling against. But I can think of a couple like Shawshank Redemption comes to mind where the villain, and I kind of use that term loosely, is the warden, who they're fighting against. But it's been a while since I last read through the main corpus of Stephen King, but there also seems to be like these sniveling little bastard type villains in the main novels. When the big evil is the big supernatural one that everybody is scared shitless of, but then you have these minor characters that kind of just get in the way, or maybe they're trying to fuck somebody over or whatever it is. So what do you got to say about that?
Well, I would agree with you. Whether it's the big evil, as you say, the arch villain that's kind of overshadowing the entire story. I mean, you think about it, and every pivotal novel of his has that major villain, whether it's it, where it takes on whatever your fear is. So if you're afraid of birds, it becomes a giant crow. If you're afraid of clowns, it becomes a clown. Its true form, in fact, if you were to see it, it would drive you insane because you wouldn't be able to comprehend it, basically, in its true natural state. The closest thing that I remember reading that story, the closest you could ever really get to it was like a giant spider. The Pennywise was more the universal picture, but reading the book, there was so many forms that thing took.
I thought it was a blue-haired feminist.
Well, there's that too. That could be some people's fears. I mean, there's definitely some guys in the sphere that I could see that being their fear.
Yeah.
So if they ran into it, that's what it would show up as.
Okay.
Or a voluptuous redhead.
Right.
Because Aaron would be scared shitless of that.
That's right. Now, Under the Dome, I read that some months ago, and that does not have a supernatural villain. Rather, it's the sheriff that's the villain.
Yeah, you're kind of right, because it's that part of it. It's been a while since I've read Under the Dome, but now that you're mentioning it, it's like the villain, any of the villainry, because there's a few other minor characters too. A lot of the town political bigwigs, where what I guess you could classify as villains, because they had their greed and they had their agendas and their power plays and all that type of bullshit that's kind of like real life in a lot of ways. What was really interesting to me that I wouldn't classify it as a villain, but the primary antagonist of that book was the source that created the dome to begin with.
Yeah.
That you don't know why the dome's there. You don't know what it is. And then you find out at the end that basically it's an alien presence, an alien thing that basically is like a kid. That it's like, oh, well, I was playing anthill, burning ants with my magnifying glass, and I got bored and wandered off. And then mom came along and said, hey, you going to let them go? Oh, yeah, I guess I'll let them go now. Because that's kind of how that story ends. That it's like, oh, the antagonist, the whole why are we under a fishbowl is the fact that it was this alien child, that wandered off and started playing with other toys. But was it a villain? Not really. It was just a kid that had, the ability to take a group of people and keep them under a bowl.
Yep, for sure. So I saw Red Crusaders. We're going to talk about Lovecraft stuff at some point, right?
Absolutely.
Why not?
Right my wheelhouse.
Okay. Go ahead, Vince. The floor is yours.
What do you want to know? I don't know the context of where this came about.
Okay,
so
well,
I went to refill my glass and then realized that my cat had decided to shit on the floor yet again. And I cleaned that up. So there you go.
He's telling you something.
Mowgli is he's a carpet shitter. Yeah.
Well, villains in Lovecraft. I haven't read much Lovecraft, so I confess ignorance here. Except other than the big evil, the dark forces, and
the emptiness and the futility of the cosmos. Yes, that is the overarching or arching villain that is very present in almost, I'd say, about 80% of Lovecraftian stories.
Right. But do you have any sniveling little bastards that just get in the way and that?
Well, this villain in particular, I'm thinking about it. His name is Jonathan Kerwin, and he is not sniveling, but he is a human evil in the case of Charles Dexter Ward, a very good novella. Check that out. So yes, part of it, the way you come to the character, it's just like you want to know more. So it's actually a very interesting evil character. That's, I wouldn't say it's relatable, but it's like, yeah, this is kind of cool. I want to know more about this character, and no one's written about him at all. Not Joseph Kerwin, sorry. But,
how well does Lovecraft do his character development?
Not the best. He's more on heavy. He's more atmospheric than anything, as far as like his descriptions and setting a tone. But as far as character development, not really. The setting, the context, that sense of fear that and dread that you can't quite put your finger on. He's really good at elucidating that. But as far as character development, no.
Okay.
No, the characters are very. I don't say they're one-dimensional, but they're really not fleshed out.
How do you think he compares to Poe?
Poe fleshes his characters out a little bit more, especially with dialogue. I mean, H.P. Lovecraft, I don't think, had a really good handle on dialogue.
Okay.
Poe, and his what's his detective's name?
Pym.
Arthur Pym.
Pym, and then there's another one.
Dupin.
Yeah, there you go. Those characters are more fleshed out and they're more believable. Not that the Lovecrafts weren't believable, but if you read Poe and then you read Lovecraft, you're like, okay, there's a big difference here. Like I said, especially in dialogue.
Right. Okay. So, in your opinion of the fiction that you've read, who do you think is the best that does character development?
In all the fiction that I've read?
Yeah.
I really like David Eddings, the Belgariad and the Malorian series.
Why is that?
It's all character development. That's not too much, not heavy on description, but all through dialogue. And these are it's hard to explain, but when you're done these books, these characters are almost like friends. Like, you want to know more about their lives. It's like, oh, this is really cool. These are books I always go back to as well.
Okay. TJ, what do you think? Your authors that are really good on character development.
I honestly don't have a favorite author. I mean, in that sense, as far as character development, because I'm kind of torn because there's some characters where the author fully developed them, but then there's also times when the characters weren't fully developed, but there was enough left for you to fill it. Like you almost felt like you were that character because you were able to just fill. That's what I was telling Vince about my new book that I was trying to accomplish. So, I don't know. I don't. There's no author that just jumps right off the top of my head of these. I mean, Dickens probably. If I was going to pick one guy, I'd say Charles Dickens developed his characters probably the best. Like he started with picking their names very carefully so that you would know everything you needed to know, and then he would spend 1,000 pages talking about it. But Vince feels a little bit differently.
Okay, so Rob,
that was in regard to Red Crusaders' description of Lovecraft. Yes and no, but we're not. But continue your explanation, TJ.
Oh, I just think Dickens, like his character, he created the most iconic. Other than, I mean, besides Shakespeare, Dickens created the most iconic characters in the English language.
Oliver Twist.
Oliver Twist. You have
Scrooge.
Ebenezer Scrooge. Take like Christmas Carol. All these very iconic characters from a very short story. So I just don't. I can't think of any other author who was able to create characters more. Now, if we were going to limit it to American authors, that'd be a little tricky because I think that I wouldn't have anybody off the top of my head necessarily. So I'd say Dickens. I would say Dickens. You know, for any faults in his writing, I would say that his characters are the most, you know, fully developed.
Okay. So Rob, what do you think? Your authors, character development.
Character development. Stephen King obviously would be one, just for the fact that, you know, most people I've encountered either love him or they hate him. I like him for the fact that you care about the characters, whether we want to call that character development or not, I don't know. I just find him very engaging, very relatable in a lot of cases, and that even includes a lot of his villains sometimes. Like, while he may not go into the mind of the villain so much, you still can end up kind of, you get an idea, you get a sense of who they are. The one that really comes to mind to me, and I forget now, because he had a name. They actually gave him a fucking name, but it was the Nosferatu in Salem's Lot, the head vampire, the head dude. That you watch the movie, and yeah, he's hideous and he's ugly and he never says a word. He just kind of hisses. But in the book, he talked. You know, you understood kind of what he was about. And there was enough mystery there that, at least for me, I wanted to know more about that dude. Some other ones that I can think of, Clive Barker, but at the same time, Clive Barker to me is very wordy. And so he gets caught up in a lot of description and a lot of things that I'm like, yeah, let's fucking move this along here, pal. And so, unless it's like his books of blood or even his novella like The Hellbound Heart, which spawned the whole Hellraiser series. And so, you know, but his character development is interesting. And I don't know, like I said, if it's the whole relatable thing or if it's even aspirational in a way that. And even King, you could say that, whether it's his good guys or his bad guys. Not only are they relatable on some level, are they human that you're like, oh, I can relate to that. I've been through that. I can think of Roland, his main character in The Dark Tower. And there's a lot of things about him that, yeah, is very Clint Eastwood-esque and a few other of your kind of Western style of character. but he's relatable, especially as time goes on. You learn about his childhood. You learn about how he grew up. And there's things you can relate to, at least I can relate to, that it's like, oh, yeah, I kind of went through that when I was a younger guy. Whether it was being a kid or like when his first love experience, it's like, yeah, that's relatable. That was kind of like mine. But you can also relate to, at least I can relate to, some of his bad guys. You know, when I think of the Man in Black, and it's like, all right, this guy kind of wants to see shit burn. And it's like, I can relate to that because, yeah, kind of like the Joker. It's like, sometimes, you know, like old Alfred said, sometimes, you know, a man just wants to watch the world burn. And it's like, yep, been there. I get it. So, you know, those are the two that come right to my mind right off the bat. Another one, and I can't think of his name right now, but he's the guy. Well, you know what? Hang on, I can pull it up. But he's the guy. He wrote a book called Under Tiberius. Let's see here. Under Tiberius. That would be the author Nick Tosches or something like that. It's a whole story about a scroll that was found in the Vatican that basically confirms the existence of Christ, except Christ isn't what you think he is. He's a con man. And it was this guy that was under Tiberius. He was an orator, and basically he was the speechwriter for Tiberius. And he kind of got ousted. He got kind of kicked out when Tiberius was losing his mind. And he ended up finding Christ as a beggar in the street and kind of took him in and had this plan of, hey, we can make a bunch of money, and turned him into the Messiah that we know of. But he was basically all full of shit. And reading it, it's a fictional story, but when you read it, it almost reads like a nonfiction book. Like, holy shit, this is how it all went down. That it's all a bunch of bullshit. But you understand Christ in a lot of ways, because in the beginning, he was all down for it. He's like, oh, yeah, let's do this. But then as time kind of goes on, he actually starts to buy into his own lines. He starts to buy into his own shit. And even the main author, this character that was this orator who wrote a lot of what Christ would regurgitate in front of the crowds, he was this Roman. Even he kind of like, God, maybe we're not supposed to be doing this and ripping people off and telling them lies and, you know, feeding them full of bullshit. And so it's very relatable in a lot of ways. A fun book. If guys get a chance, you should check it out. Wow.
Okay. Has anybody got any science fiction picks for heroes, villains, character development? Because in science fiction, you know, I was a fan of science fiction years ago. You can experiment a lot more with that, different things. TJ, your rattling is back.
So what?
Your rattling is back.
There we go.
What did you just do?
I just muted.
Oh, okay.
Much. That may be something that's going on outside. Oh, it is the computer. Good Lord.
Is it the thing in the hall?
Yeah. Sounds like the start of a game. I cannot think of
This is John Carter.
Yeah, I just haven't read the book, to be honest. Why? Like when it comes to books, my mind goes blank. Well, on all the books that I've got a ton of books that I've read. I just don't think of anything off the top of my head. I think it's because I've read too many books.
I can't think of anything science fiction wise. As far as
I mean, I've read science fiction
antagonists go.
Yeah, but I've never read one where there was like this iconic villain that just popped out at me.
What about Asimov, Vince?
Oh crap! crap. I'm drawing a blank. Yeah,
It's been a while since I last read Asimov too.
Same. I mean, it's I'm trying to think of like Harry Harrison's Stainless Steel Rat series, like the evil fuckers. And I think there was like an overarching evil guy in that one. See, I wasn't a huge sci-fi person. I was more towards fantasy.
Okay.
I was more of a fantasy guy.
Rob, were you much into sci-fi at the time?
The only sci-fi that I've really been into, I did read 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I did read a lot of the Star Wars expanded universe.
Okay.
So rather, to me, I classify that as sci-fi. That to me, that's not fantasy so much. Fantasy is more wizards and dragons and that kind of thing. So I did read a lot of the expanded universe, a lot of the early prequel stuff like the origin of Darth Bane, that kind of stuff. I really got a kick out of that because at least that explanation of why the Sith only have two, all that kind of stuff came up. And it's like, oh, okay, this is where all that started. And here's the guy who started it. And, Darth Bane is a very interesting character. He's evil, I guess. He's very self-serving, very cold-blooded, very power-mongering, power-hungry, which is the whole kind of point of being part of the dark side. But it's him consolidating power by annihilating pretty much all the other Sith. And it's like, oh, wow, he was very, very patient, very calculating to make that happen. And so that's kind of my take on sci-fi is the Star Wars universe.
Okay. All right. Well, those are all the questions that I got for Theory of Mind. Let me go ahead and shift into the last book, Useful Fictions. So this is by Michael Austin. And I touched on it briefly in the beginning. So Austin's thesis about this is most people derive pleasure from stories that they know aren't real. Okay. And we think in stories. It is a narration is a component of cognition. We don't all deal in facts. Narrative cognition offers some very important advantages in the way that we process information. However, human reason did not evolve to find truth, so Austin says, but to defend positions and obtain resources, often through figuring out how to manipulate other people. That's one thesis or conclusion he came up with. And natural selection does not care if we are happy, just to survive and reproduce. Very much a Darwinian perspective.
Yes.
Okay. So, tying into his larger thesis, one reason why you have stories is that it alleviates anxiety. It enables people through narration to deal with things anxiety. And anxiety is the most adaptive emotion. What we experience in excess is what is required for. I'm sorry, I can't read my note. I'm experiencing anxiety right now. So then he continues, he says, well, what causes anxiety? Things that threaten our safety, people we can't figure out, puzzles we can't solve, things that we can't complete, and things that are unknown. Okay, 5 sources of anxiety. And also tying into the stories, the thing about anxiety is there's exaggerated anxiety, the cost of overstating the danger that far outweighs the cost of understanding it. Exciting, producing the adrenaline needed for fight or flight, and speculative, determining the truth had taken the time that could have used for escape. Okay. So then his term of useful fiction is that it doesn't depend on its being true. One could even say it's an as if. You think as if this is the case, as if this is true, even though you know it's not true. And then 3 specific narratives. One is a predation narrative, where he says it's ubiquitous in speculative fiction such as fantasy, sci-fi, and horror, overcoming the monster in one of the plots. And this is practicing the skills to overcome the predator, to exercise human ingenuity in overcoming. This is the core of the narration itself. Then the social moray narrative, which is people negotiating complex social networks and then coming out on top. This is practicing, quote, reading other people, because this is the most cognitively demanding task, trying to figure out what other people are like and what they're thinking. And then you have the last one, narrative of detection. So very common in a murder mystery. Inducing the reader to practice solving puzzles. Okay, so there's 3 kinds of narrations there. And let's see. Yeah, so the purpose of having narratives are to exercise mental muscles, solving puzzles, giving us a perception of competence, completing the picture, and demystifying the unknown. Okay, so does anybody agree with his thesis? Narratives at their core are a means to alleviate anxiety because of outside threats, figuring out people unknown what their motivations are, solving puzzles, coming to a better understanding than you would through factual discourse.
I see narrative as fulfilling a different role from any of those.
Okay.
I see more of trying to help make sense of the world and one's role in life, or what they're doing in their life, right? And that speaks to the importance of the narrative, because if you have a narrative that's apocalyptic in nature, then that's going to cause you to behave differently than one that is optimistic or hopeful, or is based on, being able to achieve something, I guess is the right way for it. Or it's a part of storytelling. And so you may be part of the story, but not at the beginning. You may be in the middle, or you may, the apocalyptic is at the end of the story. Except necessarily you don't win, but understanding like where are you at in a story. And that could be personal narrative, there could be collective narrative, there could be a national narrative. Who you are, where you're from, where are you at, and where are you going. And that helps you to make sense of the world.
But wouldn't you say that's relieving anxiety? Because if you don't know who you are, you don't know what your nation is.
Fair enough. I think that's definitely could be part of it, is alleviating anxieties about the world, because that's why I think there's such a fight over narratives, and our big brother government wants to give us a narrative, right? And people can, and there's almost a separation. I think that's one of the issues, that there's so much babble going on, is everyone has all these different narratives, that the words you use and the way you talk is based on your narrative. So people are going to just talk past each other.
Okay. What do you think, Vince? That narrative? Do you think this Michael Austin's thesis is sound narrative to a large extent, just to alleviate anxiety?
Maybe out in the world as a whole. When you bring it back to fiction, as far as I don't know, I never really looked at it that way. I see.
Well, yeah, going back to his 3 narratives here. The first one he mentions is a predation narrative. Okay, so like fighting the monster, something is out to get you.
Mm-hmm.
It could be it could be a flesh and blood monster, or it could be Lovecraftian. There's this evil that's out there that everybody is kind of aware of and they dread, but what are they going to do about it?
Yeah, the Color Out of Space Lovecraftian one is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and then the social mores, he mentions Jane Austen's novels. Okay, the perfect example of people that are trying to negotiate this complex social world to cement their position, to come out on top, they hope, however they wish to do it. And then the narratives of detection, which is the murder mystery. Okay, how do you solve a puzzle? All right, so here's a couple more narrative lines you could throw into the pot with the 7 basic plots that we covered in earlier. That so We also talked in a previous episode about choose your own adventure type things. That's kind of solving a puzzle because you don't know which way to go. But Vince, TJ, when you guys have written stuff, have you ever come up with something like that, like a puzzle to solve for one of the characters? Is that an integral part of the plot, or is it a subplot, or don't you even think about that? For example.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Uh,
Little small, some puzzles to solve. Yes, I mean the whole story, Tesla and Malone. I mean, it's not the whole thing isn't a puzzle, but there are puzzles within it. Yes.
Okay. TJ, how about your books?
I can't say there's a lot of puzzles. There is the one, detective type novel, but I feel like the difficulty with those books is, Sherlock Holmes, and there's been so many other different detective novels. I tried to avoid that kind of, story where it was him using deductive logic and reasoning and looking at all the evidence and stuff like that, and looking at it like a puzzle, and more looking at it from human psychology. I think is kind of how. So I guess it's a puzzle, but not in a traditional sense.
So it sounds like your novels are more for social mores. How do people negotiate the social world they're in?
Yeah, my stories. I'm much more interested in human psychology than other stuff because it help. Like human behavior is a much more accurate reflection of reality than other stuff. And once you understand human psychology, the characters tend to write their own stories. Like how they're going to behave in a certain situation. If you figure out their a priori or their you know like the core of who they are, it's kind of like the trunk of a tree, right? You kind of just have an idea of where things are going to go from there.
TJ, lift up your computer again, because it's killing everybody in the chat and us.
I don't understand. It's not that loud.
It is to us.
That's what I understand. Like I can barely hear it.
It's coming from inside. It's fine now.
Okay.
So.
Well, I guess. Yeah. Here. Yeah. See.
Oh.
I'm gonna just put my computer down here. Say.
It's fucking annoying. Say.
Yeah.
So far, so good.
I don't know what else to do, so we're gonna just put the laptop down.
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, you were saying human psychology.
Yeah, I'm much more interested. Once you understand human psychology or a person's psychological state, you know how they're going to respond in certain situations. So it's a lot easier to write a character or plot a scene out. It's almost like playing a game of chess, right? You know where they're going to move their piece. So.
Okay. So Rob, I think you were gone when I was going over Michael Austin, the author's 3 types of narratives. One is a predation narrative. Something is out to get you.
Yeah.
Okay. And using his evolutionary psychology take is that this is a practice. The type of narrative that emerged eons ago was practicing the skills to overcome predation, to exercise human ingenuity in the face of this challenge, this predation. Then the second one is social mores, which is you're navigating through complex social situations. How do you maintain your advantage? How do you come out on top? And then the narratives of detection, which classic example would be a murder mystery. It's about solving puzzles. So in Stephen King, going back to our favorite example, a lot of it is about predation. This force that's out there that's but even if it's not the force, like we mentioned under the dome, the sheriff is out to get people because he's an evil bastard. And then you see some of social mores. How does I forget who's the guy that got trapped under the dome? The main protagonist.
I don't remember the name, dude. That's been like well over about 2 years since I've read it, so I don't remember.
Yeah, so he's trying to negotiate his place within the town. He's the outsider.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's that sub-narrative going on. And then the detection of what's causing the dome. Why is the dome here? What's its origin?
Right.
And leading up the clues and all that. So TJ and Vince had some things to say about narrative, but what's your take on narrative in general? I mean, do you accept this guy's thesis that the narrative is there to alleviate anxiety? And I also forgot to ask, like I did with the other ones, is how do you see this playing out in the news? Other types of
Well,
narratives.
I'm going to probably disappoint you, Tim, because everything we've discussed, while it's incredibly informative and enlightening in a lot of ways, it does remind me of back when I was in high school. And I didn't dissect what I read. I just either enjoyed it or I didn't. And that's part of why I guess I've always enjoyed Stephen King. I've never really tried to dissect him and be like, okay, now what is he trying to say here? What is he getting at? It's more like, oh, I can relate to the characters or I can't, because he's had stories that, I call, kind of his, yeah, he didn't write that. The one he wrote with his son that it's the Butterfly Effect or something or other. It's a more recent one that he wrote with his son.
Yeah,
And
I couldn't finish that one.
yeah, that was nothing but SJW propaganda to me. And I was just like, wow, talk about a fall from grace. Let's get back to the good old stories where you creep me out and people die. And it's not about strong, empowered women. I already see enough of that shit in real life. I don't need it in my fiction either. And so while I sucked it up and read the whole thing, I thought it was a terrible book. Okay. And so to kind of, I guess, answer your question, I don't think that much into it when I get into my fiction. I use fiction as a way to escape. Does it entertain me? Do I find it intriguing? Rather, I get a thrill out of the villain doing whatever they're doing, or the hero or the anti-hero. I mean, I understand the concepts, but I don't like to dissect them because then it takes the magic away from me, and which is why I've never really thoroughly cared for Shakespeare, is because it was dissected ad nauseum when I was in high school. And it got to a point that it's like, well, whatever magic was here, it's all gone for me. So I don't fucking care. Do I see narratives in the news? Well, of course. There's always, but I don't necessarily like to, for me, I don't call it narrative. I look at it more like, what type of propaganda is this? What are they trying to sell me? Because it's a pitch. It's always a pitch. And right now, the pitch is be afraid. Be afraid because a flu bug that is not even nearly as dangerous or as contagious or as high of a mortality rate as the Spanish flu is currently across the world. And, not to downplay it, but I'm kind of like, okay, so you got all the sheep fired up and they're all hiding in their houses and everybody's willing to give up their freedoms. Why? What's the goal here? What's the agenda? Why do you want this? Why is this such a big deal? I don't fully have all the answers to that other than, well, the media itself is trying to remain relevant. And so we got to talk about COVID all day. And do I believe in most of the stuff they're saying? There's so much shit out there that you don't know what is real, what isn't, as far as when the news reports it. And that even includes social media. Social media is just a smaller version of mainstream media. Everyone has an agenda. Everyone has their narrative, as you say. And so I've gotten to a point, it's not very scientific, but it's all I have. And that is, I rely on my 5 senses. And so when I go around, and maybe New York, maybe they are stacking bodies 10 deep. I've actually talked to some guys that I've gotten to know. They seem like pretty legit stand-up kind of guys, that they don't necessarily have an agenda. They're not trying to sell you a product or get you to convert to a faith or re-elect Trump or elect somebody else. But talking to them, New York, a lot of what's going on that I've read about, apparently that's legit, that it's like, wow, it's really bad in New York. But here in Utah, nobody's, all the hospitals are fine. All the clinics are fine. Do I personally, face to face know someone infected with COVID? No, I don't. I don't know anyone personally that has picked up coronavirus. Do I know anyone that knows anyone that's been infected? So like talking to my dad. Hey, Dad, do you know anyone that's been infected with COVID? He doesn't know anyone either. And granted, yeah, those are piss poor samples, but that's been my take. When I walk around throughout the day doing my job, I go into clinics, I go into hospitals, I go all over the place. They got me masking up. They're taking my temperature. They put on gloves and put on all this gear and all this shit to go around and pick up shit. And there's nobody there. And the hospital staff, they're goofing off and they're getting laid off. Their hours are getting reduced. Certain clinics that were open from, say, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., they're now open from 10 to 5. And it's like, okay, well, here's a negative effect that because of lack of people coming in because they're all scared and staying home or doing what they were told, they're not coming in anymore. Well, these people's services are no longer needed, and so their hours are getting shorted. People are rotating shifts because, well, we don't want to lay anyone off, but what we're going to do is you're going to work for a week and then you get a week off and somebody else works during the week that you're off. But you get a week off without pay type of thing. Everybody's feeling it. But why are we doing what we're doing? I don't know. Everyone's got a fucking theory. Everyone's got a conspiracy theory. Everyone has a narrative when you mention that term. And I don't know what is true and what is false other than what I see with my own eyes. And I don't try to dissect it too much, I guess, except to say, well, from what I'm seeing compared to what I'm hearing, it sounds like a bunch of bullshit to me. Especially when I start looking at hard numbers and assuming those numbers are accurate. We've had 100,000 plus deaths worldwide from COVID. Well, fuck me. We're going to have 325,000 deaths in the US alone due to car accidents. So should we quarantine people from their cars? You know, we're going to have a million deaths from heart disease. Should we quarantine people from eating fucking sugar and fats and whatever else unhealthy foods? You know, so I don't have an easy answer for you, Tim. I wish I did. You know, that's all I've got is, well, I've always looked at fiction especially as, does it take me away from my daily troubles, my daily grind? If it doesn't, then it's not good fiction. It's like, if I can't get into it, if I can't relate in the sense that, the characters are relatable. I know what that guy's going through. I've been through it or something like it. Or, I'd like to go through something like that. You know, if it doesn't pick my interest or if it doesn't, if it doesn't engage me, if I can't enjoy it, if it's too wordy, too descriptive, like Clive Barker can be that way. I've slogged through some of his stuff out of pure stubbornness. That it's like, God damn it, I bought this 2,000-page book. I'm going to fucking read it. And I did. And at the end of it, I was like, oh my God, that was brutal. And now, as I've gotten older, it's like, life's too short, man. If I can't get into it within about 2 chapters, I'm done. It's like, I'm out of here. They're either too vague and leave way too much up to interpretation, which to me is better than too descriptive where you get bogged down. That it's like, yeah, I get it. Let's move along here. But if I can't engage and I can't escape my daily reality, if I'm reading something and all it's doing is reminding me of, this is going on right now. Well, fuck it. I can go outside and see that. I don't, so to me, good fiction for me is, does it engage me and can I escape? Can I go into that world, whatever that world may be? And for the time that I'm reading it, I disengage from my world, from reality. And so can I get into it? And Stephen King has always done that for me, even if some of his stuff I hated. That it's like, well, at least I was able to disengage from my current reality. Where other authors, they may not do that. And so I don't know if that's even an answer, man. But that's just how I've always looked at it. Which is why I don't really dissect literature and try to parse it out, because then it's like going to the magic show and the magician reveals the trick. And you realize, oh, so that's how it's done. And you realize how incredibly easy it was. And then you can't unsee it. And then you're kind of let down. And I know while part of me wants to know the magic trick, most of me doesn't. It's like, no, I'm okay not knowing the trick. I want that illusion for this moment because I know this is fiction. So I don't really dissect stuff. It's maybe I'm not a critical enough thinker or something. I don't know. So.
No, I get you. I appreciate it. So I'll shut up now.
No, it's all good. No, it's just that's, for me, like I said, I love it, but it's one of those things for me that it's like, God, I've never been, I guess, in that sense, that type of a deep thinker to parse and dissect literature. It's like when it totally reminds me of high school and even some of my college classes where I tried, it was like going into movies and, okay, we're going to dissect Catch-22. We're going to dissect Dr. Strangelove. And it's like, well, okay, you just murdered the film for me. Thanks. Well, what did you like about it? I like the guy who was riding the nuclear bomb on down to detonation. Well, why did you like it? Because that was fucking hilarious. The guy did not give a fuck, but you want me to dissect it further? I can't. I don't know what the director was thinking. Let's ask the fucking director. What were you thinking? And maybe he's got an answer, but then it's the magician revealing the magic trick. And to me, it's like, oh, was it a good show or wasn't it? Whatever take you got, whether it's literature or movies, I might have an opinion to say, oh, that was good. Why'd you like it? Because it entertained me. But if I'm going to try and dissect it, it's like, man, I'm revealing the magic trick or I'm looking for the magic trick. And I don't want to do that because then it's over. That at that point, if you were to say, hey, let's dissect Fight Club, trust me, I'd be logging off the studio immediately because it's like, no. Fight Club's one of my favorite films. I don't want to dissect it because then it loses its magic for me. So.
Well, but the first rule is you don't talk about Fight Club.
Right. Exactly. That would probably be what I'd throw you. We're not going to talk about Fight Club, Tim. No, we don't go there.
Okay. So as I said, I'll shut up. But thanks for indulging me.
There you go. Well, I feel bad because, you are a thought-provoking guy, and that's one of the things I love about you. But when it comes to like literature and films and wanting to dissect them, the part of me recoils from it because it's just like, oh God, no, I want to enjoy my fantasy and get away from the world for 5 minutes or whatever. I don't want to tear it apart. And so I shy away from that. It's either, it either engaged me or it didn't. And if it didn't, then it's shitty,
Yeah, there's a lot of works out there in literary theory that I wasn't even going to approach. That's far beyond what we could ever discuss here. But as I said, I was just interested to cover these things because I was interested in narrative and particularly what the author said to say about narrative. I perfectly get where you're coming from. Is that no, I don't want to spend hours and hours dissecting literature either because it sucks the fun out of it.
Right.
Unless maybe you're talking about classic literature, which is what a lot of the literary theorists do. Yeah. Stephen King, I don't think
he's not classic literature.
No, he's not classic literature.
Thank God.
Yes.
I mean, I had an instructor in 12th grade that for the majority of the class, all we did was talked about Beowulf. Because for him, that was like the magnum opus of all books ever written, ever. And that's why to this day, I cannot pick it up again. I cannot read it again. I don't even want to talk about it other than, nope, I'm not going there. You want to talk about Beowulf? I'll see you later. Because that guy killed it for me. And that's been 30 fucking years ago.
That asshole.
Yeah, he did. He totally ruined it for me. Before that, I loved the book. And then after he dissected it over the course of a year, I was like, I'm done. I never want to see that fucking book ever again. It doesn't exist anymore for me.
Talk about a traumatic event.
Mm-hmm. But he just thought that was the greatest literary device ever created. And it's like, oh, yeah. You want flashbacks? Let's talk about Beowulf. Hey, why not?
No, we could liven things up. Vince, Blues Brothers, go.
Got an itch there, huh, Vince? Yeah,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Vince. Can you speak up?
I can't hear over the sound of how much I dislike the Blues Brothers.
Yes.
So
Where'd TJ go?
I don't know, but here you go.
He probably had to take a shit.
No, I'm here.
He's
He
a-
had to release the Kraken.
That's right. Unleash the Kraken.
Leash the Kraken.
I'll just throw in my own thoughts. I don't mind analyzing something to help understand why I've reacted the way I did to it. Or I was just watching a video that I linked to in our newsletter about a person going through why John Wayne is able to, like, how his voice dominates a scene and his use of voice control can control the direction of the camera. It can control how the scene is portrayed and how the story moves. So that's helpful for me to understand some stuff. I think what bothers me is when people start speculating or creating theories that aren't really, like, you really have to read into it. Where I'm like, okay, guys, I'm not really following you on this. Where they look at something and they want to extrapolate just tons of stuff, and more importantly, this is the definitive interpretation of this very vague, ambiguous part of a movie, right? Or something like that. Like, they're telling you, here's how you're supposed to react, rather than how you actually reacted, right? So if you didn't, if you're an idiot, like you watched Dr. Strangelove and didn't think it was funny, and you drunkenly texted people at 2 a.m. in the morning because of that, I mean, I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise. If I have to explain to you why Dr. Strangelove is funny, then I need to explain to you why you need to go see a doctor and stop drinking rum and taking 4-hour naps. So that kind of thing. But I think that analyzing films or movies or story, I think it's more important for someone who's creating stories to understand than the audience. Because then I think, like, from Rob's perspective, he doesn't want to see how the sausage is being made. He just wants to make sure that the food tastes good, right? He's
Right.
like at a restaurant. It's like being at a restaurant and they serve this very good meal and you're like, this is amazing. That doesn't mean Rob wants to have the chef come out and tell him exactly how he made the meal. It's like, yeah, dude, I don't care, right? I don't care how this beer, this champagne of beer was made, right? I just
Right.
want the beer.
Exactly. I just want the buzz and I want the taste. Don't fucking tell me what was put in it. I don't want to know that. If I wanted a list of ingredients, I could find that myself. I don't need you sharing that. Fuck off.
Well, and I think it's more of when you're not interested, and I think that's the problem with English. A lot of English literature is that they're trying to force you to be interested in something that you're not.
Right.
Or to argue about something that's like, I don't care. It's more of, did you read the book? Yes. Do you know what the book's about? Yes. Okay. We're not going to ask you any more questions than that. Like, give a brief description of the book. Any thoughts that you might have. But
what the chat thinks about TJ's computer.
I'm not. Now it's all quiet, and so I'm trying to understand why it was so loud up here, but I put it down here on the chair, and now it's quiet. Like, I'm probably, it might have dust in it. I'll just get my fan or whatever and just blast some air into it. I don't know. I did that with one of my laptops years ago, and just this huge cloud of dust came out, and it used to overheat. So now it doesn't overheat anymore, which is really cool.
So I think that's a hint.
Well, yeah, but that laptop I'd had for years, which I still have, it still works, and I still use it to play old games because that's how we roll. But yeah, I see Rob's point, and I also see Tim's point, where you want to look into stuff, and it's interesting. But I've also had people like try and talk to me about some movie or book or whatever it was, car, vehicle, whatever. I'm like, I didn't ask. I don't really care. And I'm telling you right now, and you just keep talking.
Well, that's kind of like my dad with his old cars. He restores old cars from like the 20s through the 30s, 40s, and up into the 50s. He's even dabbled with the 60s. Okay. And he tries, when I bring up, God damn, Dad, that's a good looking car. Does it go fast? Oh, let me tell you. And he starts getting into the specs, and I'm like, I don't care. Does it go fast?
Yeah, exactly.
I hit the gas pedal. Am I going to go from 0 to 60 in 3? Yeah, that's all I need to know, Dad. I don't care what engine's in it. I don't care if it's fuel injected or fucking carbureted or whatever. I don't care. I just want to know, does that fucker make a lot of badass noise? And can I smoke motherfuckers at the light? That's all I care about.
And that is an important lesson. Know your audience.
Yep.
So when you're writing or telling a story, is your audience going to care or want to hear whatever you're writing about? So if you're going to go into all this backstory about the character, you got to ask yourself, if you're writing for who is your audience? If it's for you, then yeah, you write whatever you want. But if you're writing for an actual audience, like, are they going to care? And I lean more on they don't care. They just want to get to the point of the story very quickly. And that's how I write now. But it's the same thing with stuff where you're talking to somebody and when it comes to either food or whatever it is you're doing or you appreciate, and they think that that's an invitation to basically download all their knowledge onto you, right? As opposed to saying, oh, well, how do you have any interest in, I don't know, cars, right? Like if somebody, like I've been to a couple of car shows and they would say, oh, do you know much about cars? And I go, not really. I'm just more interested in the fact that these cars are, 80, 90 years old, and yet you managed to get them to operate. And so I wouldn't ask them specific questions about the car. I would say, how did you restore it? Like, how much work did it take for you to restore this old Jeep, And then he would say, well, it took me this many years, and that's because I was working a part-time job, and I had my wife do the paint job on the outside of the car, and all this other stuff. But he stuck to the facts of what I was interested in, which was, how much time did it take you to actually do this, and what did that actually look like? Did you work on it every day? Was it just a weekend thing? Were there points where you just wanted to quit?
There you go. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like he wasn't going in and saying, "Oh, there was the crankshaft, and I had to work on that all day, and then I had
to fuck around with the chassis for about 2 weeks because that was being a bitch."
Yeah, and then this whole thing, and it's like I couldn't find this one part and all this stuff. You know about that part? Well, this is part of it. I'm going to tell you all about the founder of this piece, who came up with this piece. Back in 1910. It's like
nobody gives a shit.
Well, it's like there are people who do. There are people who do. The problem is we're not one of them.
Basically,
right? There are people out there who want to hear that, not us, right?
That's true.
It's like it's like there's stuff that I enjoy about history, but I know my buddy just couldn't care less. So when we went to England, I took a whole week in London just to go do stuff on my own because I knew he wasn't going to want to go anywhere. Like he wasn't going to want to go to Charles Dickens' house. He wasn't going to want to go to these different museums or libraries or churches that I wanted to go visit. He wouldn't have been interested in just other historical stuff because that's not his shtick.
Makes sense.
CPU repair, HOA.
Thank you for that super chat, H2.
I guess so.
All right, we are coming up on the 2-hour mark. Tim, is there anything you wanted to lead us out with?
Well, as I said, thank you for your indulgence.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it was interesting.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Of course.
Okay, good. I don't want to go to bed crying because nobody cared.
Tim's going to be curled up in the fetal position, weeping later.
That's right. It's the Lovecraftian evil.
Yeah, it's going to get me, see?
Instead of Cthulhu, I realized nobody cared.
Yes. Well, thank you, Ray Crusader. I appreciate it.
We need to get that meme of me back in.
The what?
The nobody cares meme.
The nobody cares me?
Oh,
Yeah,
I'll twatter that out again. I'll make that around.
Resurrect that one.
I'll bring that one up again. Yep.
Yeah,
Cool.
but that's all I wanted to cover tonight. I just wanted to float those theories out there. It was not analyzing literature, just talking about narratives. Again, thank you for your indulgence.
Absolutely.
For inviting
Of
me
course.
on. I appreciate it.
Anytime. Yeah, anytime.
Okay. And that's all I got.
Okay. Everyone, thank you for the super chats. Thank you for being in the chat. Thank you for hanging out with us tonight. As always,
like the fucking video.
Go ahead, Rob. Do your spiel.
Well, it's getting a little late, but okay.
Doesn't
yeah.
matter. There's still we still got 18 people here.
Hit subscribe, hit the like button. Share this with someone that would appreciate it even more than I would appreciate it. And I appreciate it a lot.
We appreciate that, Rob.
Right. So hit
Very
like,
much so.
subscribe, share.
There you go. What Rob said. So once again, thank you all. Rob, I liked your button. Everybody likes Rob's button.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Christ. So, yes, thank you all in the chat. It's good to see everyone. It's good to interact. And thank you again, Tim, for coming on and talking and discussing. Always a pleasure.
That's right.
So,
tickle YouTube's vajayjay, guys. Come on. And then comment on the video once it's rendered and all that for the replay.
Indeed.
That
Maybe
helps
we can do karaoke next time.
Yeah, we could do that. That could be fun.
Yeah, next time we got to get Rob's song out there. We'll do a little bit of
that's
one of those.
Yeah, I'll bring that out, and everyone will know. Nihilist confirmed.
There you go. Oh, we don't need any further confirmation.
Well, that for any of the doubters that are like, I don't know, I think underneath all of that gloom, doom, and let them burn, that there's a ray of sunshine over there, and then they'll hear that song and be like, oh no, he's a fucking nihilist.
Rob,
no, we would never think that of you, Rob.
No, we spent time in Rob's company. We know what Rob's all about. Yeah,
I'm all about the nihilism. I'm all about let them burn.
Pretty much, dirty whore. All right, so everyone, enjoy the rest of your week and your weekends, and we will see you all once again next Wednesday. Good night, all.
Toodles.
Don't take any wood nickels.
Meh.